The Tarkath Dominion ruled the stars with cruelty carved into every action of their empire. They were a species bred in war, forged through endless civil bloodshed, until only the most savage clans survived. Their bodies were armor with scales harder than steel. Their voices carried like blades, and their philosophy was simple: dominate or be exterminated. To the Tarkath, mercy was weakness, and weakness was a disease that demanded eradication. The galaxy trembled beneath their fleets, entire worlds bowing to the shadows cast by their war cruisers. Civilizations far older and far wiser than humanity had been stripped down to ash, their cultures left as little more than relics in alien archives. For the Tarkath, it was not conquest, it was sport. When the Dominion finally turned its attention to Earth, there was no warning, no negotiations, no pretense of diplomacy. They came with fire from the sky. Cities evaporated beneath orbital bombardments. Oceans boiled as tungsten rods speared down from orbit, and billions perished before the first Tarkath soldier ever set foot on human soil. The resistance of Earth's military was brief, valiant, but utterly futile. Jets and tanks crumbled beneath plasma fire. Fleets in orbit shattered against shields designed to withstand suns. To the Tarkath, Earth was not a battlefield. It was a hunting ground, and humanity was prey. Survivors were dragged screaming into carriers, herded like cattle into the dark corridors of slave ships. The Tarkath experimented on those they captured. Some humans were dissected, their organs cataloged like curiosities. Others were forced into genetic trials, twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves to satisfy the alien hunger for new weapons. A few were kept alive only to entertain Tarkath nobility, thrown into arenas where they fought other slaves for the amusement of their masters. Earth itself was left in ruin. Cities smoldered, skies blackened, and the blue planet that had once been humanity's cradle became a scar in the night. The galaxy scarcely noticed. To most species under Tarkath rule, humans were insignificant. They had not invented hyperdrive. They had no grand fleets, no legacy of empires, no history carved among the stars. They were primitive, a minor civilization that dared resist a godlike power. Their destruction was seen as inevitable. In the slave markets of distant systems, the human form was little more than a curiosity, sold cheaply as laborers or pets. Aliens mocked their fragility, their reliance on technology rather than biology, their strange attachment to concepts like honor and family. Among the Tarkath themselves, humans were not even worthy of contempt. They were simply another conquered species, a statistic in the endless march of their dominion. And yet, whispers began. In the shadowed corners of mining colonies, slaves spoke of strange events. A Tarkath overseer found dead, throat slit cleanly in the dark, a patrol never returning from its rounds, their bodies discovered days later with a single hole drilled into each skull. The wounds were not from plasma fire, nor from energy blades. They were crude, ballistic, the kind of injuries caused by weapons so ancient the galaxy had long forgotten them. The Tarkath dismissed the incidents as slave uprisings, trivial and contained. But the pattern spread. On one planet, a governor was found collapsed at his banquet table, a hole between his eyes. On another, a Tarkath captain was assassinated during inspection, the killing blow delivered from a distance so vast no alien rifle could have reached. The execution was never seen, never captured, and always left the same calling card: a body killed by a single primitive bullet. The aliens scoffed at first. They called it human theatrics, desperate slaves pretending at rebellion. But deep inside their ranks, unease grew. Plasma weapons were clean, erasing flesh and bone in bursts of energy. Blades cut with precision, cauterizing wounds as they struck. But these deaths were messy, brutal, intimate. Ballistic projectiles tore through muscle and shattered bone, leaving corpses drenched in blood. To the Tarkath, it was barbaric. To humans, it was familiar. In the slave quarters, the story spread like fire. They whisper a figure, a shadow that moved unseen through Tarkath strongholds. He was no general, no soldier in uniform, no leader rallying armies. He was a man who killed alone. They called him the Hitman. No one knew his name, no one knew his face, and perhaps he had none, but they swore he was human, one of their own who had survived the fall of Earth. To the broken remnants of humanity, He was not just a man. He was proof that they were not finished. Proof that even in chains, humanity could still strike fear into the hearts of their conquerors. The Tarkath dismissed the legend as myth. Their propaganda declared the Hitman a fabrication, a false hope created by desperate slaves. Yet the bodies of their officers kept piling up. Patrols sent to hunt him vanished without trace. Governors began surrounding themselves with guards, locking themselves inside fortresses meant to withstand armies. Yet still they died. The more the Tarkath tried to silence the whispers, the louder they became. Among the enslaved, a single phrase spread: "If one of us can fight, all of us can endure." On a mining world carved into bones of an asteroid, an entire Tarkath garrison was found dead one morning. Every soldier, every officer, every overseer, all executed with surgical precision. Security systems showed nothing. No intruders, no alarms, only shadows where cameras should have captured images. The only evidence left behind was a wall marked by a crude drawing, a human skull etched in Tarkath blood. Panic spread through the ranks. If one human could accomplish this, how many more could there be? What if the myth was not a single man, but a movement? The Tarkath High Council convened in fury. They declared humanity to be a disease that required total eradication. Every surviving human was ordered hunted down, their genes erased from every archive, their presence purged from history. But the more they killed, the more resistance grew. Every act of slaughter only fueled the legend further. To the Tarkath, the Hitman was an anomaly, a lone predator to be cornered and destroyed. To humanity, he was the spark of something greater. On distant slave worlds, humans began standing taller. They worked silently, but their eyes carried defiance. Tarkath noticed a change and grew uneasy. Something was shifting, something they could not explain. It was not an army, not a rebellion in the traditional sense. It was something smaller, sharper, more dangerous. The galaxy had always measured strength in fleets, in firepower, in technology. But the Hitman measured strength in patience, in precision, in fear. For the first time, the Tarkath Dominion realized that humans were not like other species. They did not break cleanly under the weight of oppression. They adapted. They endured. They learned the weaknesses of their enemy, studied them, and then struck with terrifying accuracy. The Tarkath were used to crushing civilizations with overwhelming force. But overwhelming force meant nothing against a phantom who could not be caught. He was no hero, no savior, no chosen one. He was simply a man who refused to die when Earth burned. Once, long before the Tarkath invasion, he had been trained in the shadows of human intelligence networks, molded by a profession that demanded precision, patience, and the ability to vanish without trace. He had no name worth remembering, no flag left to serve, no government left to obey. What he carried was his craft, a discipline so honed that it had become instinct. The Tarkath called him the Hitman because they needed a name to wrap their fear around. For him, it was survival. For humanity, it was revenge made flesh. He understood the Tarkath in ways they could not understand him. They were warriors bred for brutality, creatures who relied on intimidation, sheer power, and overwhelming presence. They marched in heavy boots, armored in scales, their ships and weapons vast, their numbers endless. Subtlety was alien to them. They had no word for patience in their language. They had no concept of a battle fought without honor banners, drums, and overwhelming spectacle. To strike unseen was dishonor. To kill without a duel was cowardice. They believed fear came from displays of power. He knew otherwise. True fear came from silence, from uncertainty, from the knowledge that death could come at any moment, unseen and unstoppable. Every operation was designed with precision. He studied Tarkath patrol routes until he knew them better than the soldiers themselves. He understood their arrogance, how they left blind spots in their own defenses, because they could not imagine anyone daring to exploit them. He observed their physiology, noting how their scaled hides protected their torsos, but left vulnerable gaps at the throat, the eye, the temple. Where plasma fire dispersed against their armor, a bullet drove through bone. Where energy blades clashed with their claws, a knife slipped beneath and ended the fight before it began. They had built themselves to withstand wars of spectacle, but not wars of shadows. On world where Tarkath supply lines ran unchallenged, suddenly freighters would vanish into void. Whole convoys were discovered adrift. Crews executed with a single shot each. Cargo scattered. On garrison planets, entire communication hubs were found crippled, their systems burned out by primitive explosives set with terrifying ingenuity. Surveillance footage revealed nothing but empty corridors, systems failing as though haunted. The Tarkath tried to hide the losses, yet panic spread through their ranks faster than any rumor. They were masters of domination, but domination required control, and control began slipping away the moment one man made them feel hunted. The Tarkath unleashed hunters bred for pursuit. They deployed hounds with senses able to track a heartbeat across kilometers. They unleashed drones carrying scanners that could sweep entire districts in seconds. They employed psychic trackers whose minds could brush against memories to follow prey across worlds. Every attempt failed. Patrols sent to pursue him vanished. Trackers went silent. Drones returned nothing but static, as though the shadows themselves had consumed them. For the first time in centuries, the Tarkath had found an enemy they could not predict. They could crush armies, but they could not cage a ghost. Each assassination carried a message. He never wasted movement, never killed for spectacle, never struck at random. Each target was chosen with surgical care. He struck governors who enforced the Dominion's chains, admirals who commanded fleets of conquest, scientists who experimented on human captives. Each death carried a ripple. After a governor was executed at his palace banquet, his entire sector descended into chaos as Tarkath nobles fought for control. When an admiral fell with a single bullet to the eye, 3 fleets delayed their campaigns, commanders too terrified to assume his role. When the chief geneticist of a slave facility was found dead at her workstation, experiments halted, and thousands of humans were quietly smuggled to safety in confusion. The Tarkath began to realize they were no longer facing a lone assassin. They were facing an idea. Wherever humans were enslaved, they whispered his name. Wherever a Tarkath officer fell, humans stood taller. Even those who never saw him believed he walked among them. To slaves on mining worlds, the creak of a vent in the dark was a sign he had passed through. To laborers chained in factories, the sudden silence of a guard patrol was proof he was near. His presence was everywhere, his body seen nowhere. A ghost given flesh by hope. What terrified the Tarkath most was not his kills, but the methods. They had advanced weapons powered by reactors the size of buildings, plasma rifles capable of melting walls, fleets that could annihilate continents. He used weapons so primitive the galaxy considered them obsolete. Ballistic rifles, knives forged of steel, explosives cobbled together from scraps. Tools unworthy of notice in an age of energy warfare. Yet in his hands they became instruments of terror. Each bullet was more than a kill. It was a reminder. Humanity did not need the galaxy's technology to fight. They needed only their resolve. Other enslaved species began to take notice. For centuries, they had lived beneath Tarkath chains, beaten into submission, convinced no rebellion could succeed. Yet now they saw humans, fragile and broken as they seemed, defying the impossible. They watched as Tarkath governors died, as fleets faltered, as strongholds were shaken. If humans could fight, what excuse did they have for submission? The legend of the Hitman spread beyond humanity. It became a seed planted in alien minds. The Tarkath were not gods. They could bleed. The Dominion responded with fury. They declared that any human found beyond immediate supervision was to be executed on sight. They doubled patrols. They placed bounties worth fortunes on the assassin's head. They even spread propaganda that the Hitman was not human at all, but a rogue Tarkath betrayer, to prevent humans from clinging to the symbol. But propaganda failed against corpses. Every time a Tarkath warlord was found with a bullet through his skull, the lie crumbled. Every time a human whispered the name in defiance, the symbol grew. He did not speak. He never left messages beyond his kills. Yet humanity gave him a voice. One bullet, one message. They said, until the words became scripture, no human alive could say where he would strike next. No Tarkath commander could sleep without fearing the shadow at his door. For every alien laughing at human weakness, another awoke at night drenched in sweat. imagining a barrel pointed at a skull. The Dominion's power was built on fear, and for the first time that fear turned inward. The moment that changed everything came when a Tarkath warlord fell. He was not a governor or a captain, but one of the ruling elite, a commander of sectors, his name etched in blood across entire systems. He traveled with an honor guard of 1,000, his fortress a mountain of iron and fire. No enemy had ever approached him. No rebellion had ever threatened his reign. Yet one morning, his guards found him slumped at his throne, a hole drilled neatly into his temple. No alarms had sounded. No intruder had been detected. His fortress was untouched, his army intact. But their warlord was dead, fell by a single bullet placed with impossible precision. The Tarkath Dominion believed fear could keep the galaxy chained forever. Their fleet stretched across star systems, their banners burned on conquered worlds. Their name carried like thunder. Yet the cracks had already formed, and each one spread from a single source. The Hitman had become more than a man, more than an assassin. He was a myth that walked, and myths could not be killed with plasma fire. In the aftermath of the Warlords' assassination, a silence hung over Tarkath space. No commander wished to leave his fortress. No governor trusted his guards. Suspicion poisoned their ranks. Soldiers executed one another on whispers of treachery. The Dominion's war machine faltered, not from lack of strength, but from the cancer of paranoia. And into that silence, humanity moved. For decades it endured chains, beaten, scattered, forced to toil on worlds not their own. They had been mocked as fragile, laughed at as primitives, dismissed as incapable of standing against their conquerors. But now they remembered who they were. Small groups of slaves began refusing orders. A miner on one asteroid took up a tool and struck down his overseer. A technician on a Tarkath outpost sabotaged power grids, plunging the station into chaos. A medic smuggled weapons between camps under the cover of tending the wounded. Each act alone was small. Together, they became sparks that lit a fire across the galaxy. The Tarkath tried to stamp it out with brutality. Entire camps were slaughtered in reprisal. Cities burned as examples to others. Yet every act of terror created more defiance. Humans who once bent their heads in silence now looked their masters in the eye and saw weakness. They had lived too long with fear to be controlled by it. Fear no longer belonged to humanity. Fear belonged to the Tarkath. Across the stars, other species watched. They had endured Tarkath rule for centuries, beaten into submission, told resistance was futile. But they saw humans, weak, fragile, barely surviving, rise and strike back. And they asked themselves a question their ancestors had long buried. If humans could fight, why couldn't they? Quietly at first, in whispers, in hidden gatherings, the thought spread. The Tarkath had always claimed rebellion was impossible. Humanity proved otherwise. The Hitman never appeared in the open, but his shadow grew larger with every passing day. Entire fleets were delayed because admirals refused to take command, terrified they would be the next target. Governors demanded triple their guards, but still locked themselves inside their chambers, trembling at every noise. The Dominion sent entire divisions to hunt him, but they found nothing. It no longer mattered whether he was one man or many. To the galaxy, he was a force. To the Tarkath, he was inevitability. At the center of the Dominion's empire stood the High Citadel, a fortress world of iron and flame where the supreme warlord reigned. His word was law, his armies countless, his throne carved from the bones of species long extinct. To the Tarkath, he was untouchable, the living embodiment of their eternal rule. To the Hitman, he was a final target. No one knew how he breached the Citadel. Some whispered he walked through the shadows themselves. Others claimed he infiltrated as a slave and rose from the dungeons unseen. The Tarkath would never admit the truth, for the truth was their shame. Somehow, he entered the heart of their empire and brought death with him. Guards vanished. Systems failed. Alarms never sounded. When the Supreme Warlord's guards found him, it was already too late. Their master sat lifeless on his throne, a single bullet hole drilled through his skull. One shot, placed with impossible precision, the mark of the same hand that had haunted the Dominion for years. And on the throne beside the corpse lay an ancient relic, a weapon the galaxy had long forgotten, a human pistol, still warm from the final shot. Panic tore through the Dominion. For the first time in their history, the Tarkath had no leader. Councils descended into chaos. Warlords turned on one another. Fleets fractured. The Dominion's power had always been built on fear of their supremacy, and with their supreme warlord dead, that supremacy was shattered. Entire systems rose in rebellion overnight. Species that had cowered for centuries armed themselves with whatever they could find and struck at their oppressors. Human slaves, once scattered and broken, now led revolts across colonies. Tarkath soldiers who had once walked as gods found themselves hunted, cornered, dragged from their fortresses by those they had enslaved. The galaxy shifted. For every Tarkath fortress that fell, for every fleet that fractured, the legend of humanity grew. They were no longer the species that had been annihilated on their home world. They were the species that had struck terror into the most savage empire the stars had ever known. They were the species that had shown the galaxy that no conqueror was eternal. The Tarkath tried to rally. Some claimed new thrones, others promised vengeance, but their unity was gone. Fear rotted them from within. Every commander feared his rival. Every soldier doubted his officer. Every fortress trembled at shadows. The Dominion was not destroyed by fleets or firepower. It was destroyed by a myth made real, by a message repeated until the galaxy believed it. Humanity survives. In the chaos that followed, humans did not rise as conquerors. They had no fleets to claim, no empire to build. They did not seek thrones or dominion. They sought only survival, and survival was victory enough. But their example ignited something greater. Species long chained began to fight for themselves. Entire worlds rose, not for humanity, but because humanity had reminded them they could. The Tarkath, once fear above all others, became prey in a galaxy they once ruled. As for the Hitman, his fate remained unknown. Some swore he fell in the Citadel, his mission complete, his life given for the final bullet. Others claimed he still walked among the stars, faceless and silent, watching from the shadows. The Tarkath insisted he never existed, that it was all propaganda, a trick of perception. But the galaxy knew better. Whether man or myth, assassin or symbol, he had changed everything. Among humans, his name was never spoken aloud, for he had never given it. He was not remembered for who he was, but for what he represented. He was the embodiment of a truth the Tarkath had tried to erase. Humanity does not break. They adapt. They endure. They wait. And when the time comes, they strike. In the centuries that followed, alien scholars debated how a species so small, so fragile, could have brought down the greatest empire of its age. Some argued it was strategy, others chance, others still divine fate. But humanity knew the answer. They had always known. It was not fleets, not armies, not technology. It was will, the will to fight when all seemed lost, the will to endure when others surrendered, the will to keep going when there was nothing left but survival. That was their strength. That was their weapon. The Tarkath had called them weak. They had called them prey. They had called them fragile and doomed. But in the end, the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity was a predator that could not be caged. Humanity was a flame that could not be extinguished. Humanity was a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there's always one who will stand, one who will strike, one who will carry the message. One bullet, one message. Humanity survives.